Right.
So we rolling?
Yeah.
What I'm interested in starting with Jake is, how did you get involved with Weary Dunlop?
I met him properly, properly if that means anything, for the first time in Chungkai when I went down there. I'd been sent down sick from Kenyu, although I had actually caught glimpses of him at Hintok when I went up there, just for a brief period, some months before. But that's where it all started, because I was at Chungkai sick, and then as I was getting better, I started to work with Markovich, another surgeon, a Canadian surgeon there. And he did some of the first amputations there, and I did some drawings with him, and working with him in general terms. And then Weary came down subsequently and worked with Marco, and then I really got involved with him then. That was when it all started, because he seemed to be interested in the drawings. In fact, it gave, as I think I told you before, a lot of point to doing the drawings at all, so that we could keep a record of the sort of things that they were doing surgically.
And as a surgeon, what would you say about Weary Dunlop as a surgeon, given all the conditions?
I think he's a legend more than anything else. It sounds exaggerated in a way, but it's not just. One can't speak too highly of him, because all the time he was improvising. He was coping with the beatings up that he got. He was coping with the multiple problems of a vast range of diseases and a vast range of surgical problems. And you've got all this going on at the same time, and I think that is really quite staggering how he managed to not only survive in terms of health, but even mentally with the load that was put on his shoulders anyway. So I think he's a very, very brilliant man, a very courageous man, and a very eminent man. He's one of the few great men I think I've ever met in my life.
Talking about those beatings, he talks about them in the most matter-of-fact way, but he took a fearsome pounding from the Japanese on behalf of his men at times, didn't he?
Yes, he did, most unjustly. I think at one time they disliked him because he was tall. He was this immense man with these rather small creatures, and they... I think that one time as far as I can remember, they beat him up, made him kneel down and beat him up just simply because they felt like it, and he was a huge man, and they were going to assert their authority. But I've seen him come into the theatre anyway, covered in blood, and his face knocked about, and grunt something quite cheerfully and wash up, and then operate for the rest of the day without moaning at all. I can remember him saying to me one day, he said, "Oh, these bastards have been at me again, Jack," something, and we thought, God almighty, when are they going to stop? It was like that most of the time, and yet he never grumbled, and he was always concerned with other people all the time, and he was a selfless man, and a very great man, I think.
If we could again just return briefly to the operating theatre, you working almost like the official recorder of what he was doing surgically, you must have seen, do the memories still remain vivid with you of those really difficult things, amputations? It couldn't have been fun in normal circumstances. I'm not saying fun, it wouldn't have been easy for a surgeon in normal circumstances, but just given everything that was going on, it must have been unbelievable.
It was, really. It was a kind of carnage, and I don't know how they were able to think clearly enough to cope with it. Because, they did have to improvise and change methods, and almost everything they did was a kind of one-off at each time, and there was no kind of standard procedure, really. And first of all, of course, the equipment they had was very inadequate. There was no bone saw, so that they used an ordinary tenon saw, which had to be sharpened up by the carpenter from time to time. And there were odd knives, ordinary knives that were honed down. And then I think the sort of magic part of this whole thing was the way, if you put a lot of people together with different skills, they can move half a mountain. If you have, as I say, I was telling you the other day, we had a geneticist in the camp who grew sort of odd plants from time to time and knew something about the sort of flavours that these would make. Quite apart from that, there were also roots and things that could provide primitive medicines. Then, and in Nakompathon, he worked with the pharmacist there who produced the rice and yeast culture, and they worked with tinsmiths who then produced a couple of Liebig condensers out of old milk tins. They ran the solder off and things. And that produced, I think it was 92% alcohol, if my memory is right. So it gave us something to clean wounds with. And so there's the pharmacists and geneticists and the tinsmiths and so on, and you fit them all together, and it makes incredible sense, you know. And I think these are things we really remember rather than just the sort of sheer horror of it. I mean, one obviously.
Jack, can you just recap on that point you're talking about, all this mixture of people, just briefly?
Yes, I think that's the thing I remember so much about it. There's the ingenuity of people when you put them together under difficult circumstances. If they have...
Stop typing. That is really loud. You know, it's just so intrusive if you hear it. So now, hopefully, he'll be quiet. Please be quiet. ESP. It's quiet. Just again, Jack, just picking up on that, the ingenuity of people.
Yes, and that's the thing I do remember so very clearly, that you know, if they had some guts, some courage, and some pull and some energy, even despite the fact that many of them were very sick anyway, they could produce a kind of near miracle from time to time. And the hub of this all was of course Weary and people like Marco with him, but really was I suppose the catalyst for all this, and I think we always said, well, if Weary's about, then okay, we shall be all right. I mean, he gave us confidence, and I think that the reason one survived so much was this reliance on other people such as him to pull one through. I think we really owe him our lives in many ways. Well, it's a lot of people do, but I'm sure I do too, having moved down with him and so on. You were asking me there about the sort of sad side of it. What I do remember very, very clearly is the kind of pitiful sight of the sick at times. I mean, one group of people came down in a barge. There were about 6 or 8 barges rather, and there were about 16 people to a barge. Half of them were already dead. They'd been in these barges for nearly 2 weeks or something, and they were absolutely silent. None of them could speak, you know, and they looked almost inhuman, if you like. They were hardly human anymore. It's difficult to describe. And they were covered in flies and their own feces and filth, and we took them out. And this really produced a lot of tears, I can tell you, at that time. One remembers that. And of friends dying, again, covered in flies and their own muck and so on, but nothing to clean them up, nothing to relieve them. And I think this is a heartbreaking part of it.
How important were your drawings from your point of view?
All right, I suppose as an artist, I mean...
We're going to have a boat start up. I just want to ask that one other question. Having seen many of your paintings, Jack, they're very impressive. I just wondered how you, given all the circumstances, could sit there and find the time and hide from the Japanese and do those paintings. How did you do it?
It wasn't easy up country because, you know, one was working and you had to do it between times. I think many of them were done when one was really sick, or when you were not working on the railway itself. And one scrounged on scraps of paper. We became very good thieves. You know, we knocked paper off all over the shop, anything. And I had a few paints when I went up there, a few of these tiny little palettes of watercolours, and I did those, and I hid some. One of the Korean guards found one lot of them. When I was sick, I'd had dysentery and I got some malaria, and I wasn't in a good shape. And I had a very nasty couple of days then because it was forbidden. But we managed to. They tore those all up, but I managed to hide quite a lot, you know, in bamboo in the ground and in the rooftop. We made a false bottom to a little haversack thing. And subsequently, I hid some of them in one of the wooden legs. You know, we hollowed one of these out, but that was later on in the conflict. It was difficult up country, but it was easier in the sick camps. Rather on, because I mean, then you could hide it. I mean, there were huts full of sick, and we could put it under our bed spaces and all sorts of things. The searches weren't quite as foul, and the sudden and the camps were bigger. It was difficult. One of the odd things that happened, and it was I think is fortuitous and strange, was that I was next to an Aussie. I think I'd had scrub typhus, some weird thing. I was coming out of this. I can't remember much about it, but as I got better, he was next to me. And of all things, he was a superb embroiderer. He had hands like mechanical grabs, but he was very interesting, marvellous bloke. And in his haversack, he had a box of Winsor & Newton's artist colours in tubes, untouched, which was quite a heavy thing. And what the hell he was doing carrying this thing about up there? And he wasn't an artist. He hadn't anything to do with painting. And I said, you know, what have you got these for? And he said, well, I don't know, I just like them. They were rather interesting. So I gave him a few duck's eggs for these. I mean, it was just ridiculous to get them, this sort of thing. So I managed to tip those out and keep them in a small, you know, a small container. I put in a bit of bamboo, and they sort of served me pretty well the rest of the time. We had to do the surgical drawings sort of rather carefully so that nobody could see those. I mean, the Japs didn't want records of that bad side. But I managed to do a lot of landscapes and a lot of plant drawings and things, you know. All of these are being shown in Bristol at the moment, like on exhibition on about 75 frames of drawings, which amazed me. Maybe got some through, but I think I did them because, as you asked me earlier on.
Speak up. I'll just ask the question. Why did you do them?
I think that part of it's all part of it.
Start by saying that I did them.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So keep it self-contained, if I go.
Yes. I did them because basically I suppose it was part of the ethos of.
Stop. You hardly hear that, can you? Jake, just explain why you did these paintings.
I did them because I suppose in one sense I couldn't help it. You know, I was an artist and you want to record things. Also too, I was young and it was all new stuff to me. I mean, we'd never been up to the jungle before and so on. And I wanted to get some of it down. That's how it began. And also it's part of the whole ethos of being an artist, if you like. You know, and it just happened. But it did gather momentum and purpose, of course, after meeting Markovich and then subsequently Weary in particular.
Because he wanted you, well, you ended up being basically his official recorder,
yes.
Did you not? In the absence of photographs, you were the person that was doing that for him.
Yes, yes. And very proud to do it, I must say, and very privileged to do it.
I just wondered, as a POM, you were accepted by this bunch of Aussies up here in the bush.
I have to be careful about this. What I say, I don't offend the other POMs, but I found working and being with Australians immensely stimulating. I mean, I would, under difficult circumstances, I enjoyed being with the Aussies because there was always a brew up. They were always doing something. They were always sort of inventive, and they always had the guts to, you know, to pull out of something in the best possible way. And I found this. I mean, it was a lifesaver, if you like, and so therefore I thought, once again, I was very privileged to be with them. A lot of people subsequently thought I was an Australian for some witness or other, but which I was very pleased about that matter. And then I suppose working with Dunlop afterwards, he wanted me to go back to Australia with him. I wanted to go back, but the British Army wouldn't release me, and I hated the British Army anyway. But so I must be careful about saying these sort of things. But I enjoyed the company of Australians, and they were very good to me. And this is really why I've come here this time, and why I came here 2 years ago with the Australians. Obviously it's to under Dunlop, but also to be with people that I like, you know.
You also, I mean, you make the point, and we won't go into any great detail, but I think you weren't particularly pleased with basically the structure of the British Army and the way the British officers behave, without going into great detail.
No, I wasn't. I think there's some stories that in some ways ought to be told. It's difficult to do it. It's a long time afterwards, but the performance.
You right? Again, we won't go into a great amount of detail, but it's become very obvious to me that you didn't have a very high opinion of many British officers and the whole way, the hierarchical structure of the British Army.
No, that's perfectly true. There were a few very fine men that certainly won with honour, but there were an awful lot of self-seeking characters who, under those circumstances, thought, you know, exclusively of themselves. And this is where people like Dunlop and the others stood out a mile and were so such eminent people. We remember them with enormous affection, of course.
Do you think that maybe sometime people should be made aware of maybe the behaviour of some of the officers? And we discussed this once before as well, that people like Edward Dunlop haven't had the recognition that they were due, yet others who possibly weren't due that recognition were recognised on their return.
Yes, some of us were very fed up that one or two extremely incompetent and totally undeserving people were given OBEs and various awards of that nature almost as soon as they got back, mainly because they were senior British officers and not because of their performance as senior British officers. And that really got up our noses. We got very fed up with that. And I had a letter from Weary.
Just so we just about get there every time. Again, just recapping that you've expressed to me before the opinion that you thought that some people, some British officers who returned were recognised, and then you had people like Edward Dunlop who weren't recognised for years, or if they were barely recognised.
Yes. Yeah, this made a lot of us very angry because there were one or two senior British officers who were given quite high awards, I mean, OBs and MBs and things like that, when they got back, largely because, or almost exclusively because they were senior British officers and not because of their performance as officers. There were some, of course, that were very fine men and which we remember with a lot of affection, but from all this, of course, Dunlop stood out a mile. I mean, there was just no comparison whatever. I mean, he's an entirely selfless man.
Do you feel in some ways that you're almost an honorary Australian now?
I would like, yes, I mustn't be impertinent about it, but I would like to feel that, yes. Yes, I would. Very much so. That would please me a great deal.
Because just watching the men, when they're with you, they treat you with a lot of affection, which they show towards their own mates as well. So it would seem that you've been accepted as one of the fold.
Well, it pleases me enormously if you've sort of seen that. I feel that anyway. I mean, I've had nothing but enormous kindness, and when I came on the trip 2 years ago, I had an enormous welcome. I mean, most of them didn't know me, but I mean, I was just given a greeting and treated as one of them, and I so appreciated it. I thought it was tremendously kind, and we had a marvellous time. So I do feel like that. Patsy Adam Smith, your writer, at one time I think thought I was Australian. She comes. She's in London now, and she's going to stay with us a few weeks' time, and so she doesn't really treat me as a Pom at all, which is lovely.
Just very briefly, if you could I know we've said a lot of nice things about Weary Dunlop, but how should the world remember Weary Dunlop?
I think as an example of pure selflessness. That's all. I mean, he's concerned all the time with other people, quite above his surgery. I mean, at the moment he's just looking, or since the war he's done nothing but look after his own soldiers and people who suffered as a result of the war, and has worked tirelessly for them. I mean, he's a human dynamo of sorts, isn't he? He just doesn't stop. It's always geared to looking after others, and really there are damn few people who you can say that about.
Thanks, Joe. That was lovely. That was fine.
Okay. Well,